June 4, 1942. Over the calm Pacific near Midway Atoll, 4 pillars of fire rise where Japan's pride once sailed. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, gone in a single day. More than 110 of Japan's best naval aviators vanished beneath the waves. It was not just a defeat. It was the day Japan's future died in the sky. Before Midway, Japanese naval aviation was unmatched. Their pilots were craftsmen of the air, men forged through years of relentless training, each flight a lesson in perfection. By 1941, a Japanese naval aviator logged 600 to 800 flight hours before combat. They mastered formation flying until it became instinct. They could navigate an ocean using only compass and memory. They were not soldiers, they were artists. But artistry takes time, and time is the one thing war never gives. When those men died at Midway, Japan lost more than aircraft. It lost the irreplaceable. Tokyo's admirals refused to believe what the numbers already showed. Their training schools could produce hundreds, not thousands. Each new pilot still endured years of rigid instruction, chosen from a tiny elite. Out of 1,500 applicants in 1937, only 70 were accepted. 25 graduated. By the time one man finished his course, America had trained entire squadrons. In the United States, the war had become industrial science. By 1943, naval flight schools from Florida to California ran like assembly lines. 18 months from civilian to combat-ready aviator. Efficient, repeatable, endless. 20,000 new naval pilots in 1 year. Each man trained to a standard, not a legend. Japan still believed that spirit could replace system, that quality would defeat quantity. But industry does not tire. Industry does not bleed. Industry only grows stronger. At Tsuchiura Air Base, Japanese instructors watched fuel supplies shrink, hours of flight cut in half, then half again. Students graduated with 200 hours, then 100. By late 1944, some barely 40. Saburo Sakai, Japan's surviving ace, called it a tragedy in motion. He wrote that every runway became a graveyard. Fire engines waited at the end of every strip. They knew the next student would crash. The empire had chosen to die beautifully, rather than adapt brutally. While in America, men in factories stitched wings, bolted engines, and stamped serial numbers by the thousands. Every pilot who died was replaced before his bunk cooled. By the spring of 1944, 2 worlds were heading toward collision. One built on tradition and faith, the other built on steel and mathematics. And somewhere over the blue emptiness of the Pacific, a young man named Alexander Varachu was preparing to prove which world would survive. Career in June 19, 1944, 140 miles northwest of Guam. The sun rose over Task Force 58, 15 carriers, bristling with fighters, bombers, and the power of an empire in motion. Below deck, mechanics checked oil lines, tightened bolts, wiped the glass of the Hellcats that waited to fly. Above, radar screens glowed faintly in the half-light. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher watched the horizon from the bridge of USS Lexington. The air was calm, the sea deceptively quiet. Then, at 10:15 a.m., a voice cut through the static. Bogies, 75 miles out, bearing 240. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot had begun. Within minutes, the flight deck became chaos in perfect order. Engines roared to life, propellers screamed, and the smell of aviation fuel filled the air. Launch the CAP. Fighter Squadron 16 thundered down the deck. Among them, Lieutenant Junior Grade Alexander Varachu. He had 12 victories already, calm, focused, still carrying the lessons of his mentor, Commander Butch O'Hare. His Hellcat lifted from the deck and climbed toward the morning sun. Below, Japanese formations approached in waves. 69 aircraft, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and escorts, closing fast. They were flying blind, without radar guidance, without coordination, led by men barely trained. Above them, more than 200 American Hellcats formed an invisible wall. Radar controllers aboard Lexington vectored fighters into position with machine precision. Angels 15, turn heading 170, you'll meet them there. The sky erupted. Hellcats dove through the sunlight, guns blazing. Japanese formations shattered instantly. Pilots turned the wrong way, into gunfire. Dive bombers broke formation, spinning helplessly into the sea. For the Americans, it felt effortless. For the Japanese, it was slaughter. Alexander Vrachu spotted his prey, 50 dive bombers in loose formation below him. He rolled inverted, dove, and opened fire in short, perfect bursts. One bomber exploded, then another. A third disintegrated under his guns. They never saw him coming. They flew straight and level, obedient to training that could no longer save them. In 8 minutes, Vrachu destroyed 6 aircraft. He fired only 360 rounds, 60 per kill. When he returned to the Lexington, oil streaked across his windshield, his face black with soot. He grinned and raised 6 fingers to the admiral on the bridge. The photograph captured that moment. Confidence without arrogance, victory without cruelty. But Vrachu was not unique. All across the sky that day, other Hellcat pilots wrote the same story in gunfire and smoke. 69 enemy planes became 27. Then 109 became 31. Wave after wave dissolved under the weight of radar, training, and steel. By dusk, 373 Japanese aircraft had launched. Only 130 returned. The kill ratio, 11-1. It was not a battle. It was mathematics made visible. That evening, pilots walked the decks in silence. They had won, yes, but the victory felt like inevitability, not glory. For Japan, it was the day the sky closed forever. So beneath the chaos above, the Pacific hit another battlefield, a silent one. June 19, 1944. While Hellcats carved the sky, 2 American submarines stalked the depths, USS Albacore and USS Kavala. Each carried 21-inch torpedoes. Each hunted something far greater than planes. At 8:10 a.m., Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard aboard Albacore spotted the shadow of a massive carrier on the horizon, the Japanese flagship Taihō. It was Japan's newest, most powerful carrier, armored, fast, and believed to be unsinkable. But even armor cannot stop luck. Blanchard's fire control computer failed. He aimed by eye, adjusting for range and bearing through the periscope. He fired 6 torpedoes. One found its mark. The explosion tore open a fuel tank deep inside Taihō. Aviation gasoline began to leak, invisible but deadly. At first, damage control reported minor impact. Speed reduced by 1 knot. Operations continued. But as hours passed, gasoline vapors crept through the ship. Ventilation fans spread them instead of venting them out. At 2:30 p.m., somewhere below deck, a spark ignited the fumes. The armored flight deck bulged upward like a tin can under pressure. Fire raced through hangars. Secondary explosions followed. At 4:28 p.m., Taihō rolled and slipped beneath the waves, taking 1,660 men with her. 5 hours later, another submarine waited. USS Kavala, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Herman Kostler, trailed another giant, the veteran carrier Shōkaku. She had fought at Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz. Now she was returning fire for the last time. At 11:18 a.m., Kavala fired 6 torpedoes from just over 1,200 yards. 3 struck home. Explosions ripped through her forward magazines and aviation fuel tanks. Fire engulfed the ship. At 2:12 p.m., Shōkaku stood on her bow, her stern rising high before plunging into the sea. 1,263 sailors went down with her. In less than 10 hours, Japan had lost 2 of its most powerful carriers, not to bombs, not to fighters, but to silent hunters. The submarines escaped, untouched. The destroyers above dropped over 100 depth charges in retaliation, but the sea swallowed their fury and gave nothing back. With Taihō and Shōkaku gone, Admiral Ozawa's fleet was crippled. Of the 9 carriers that had sailed that morning, only 7 remained, and most without aircraft to launch. Japanese radar failed. Fuel ran low. Their pilots were gone. Their carriers were ghosts. For the first time in history, an entire naval air force had been erased in a single day. It was the turning point of the Pacific War, the day when Japan's navy ceased to exist as an offensive weapon. From that moment forward, the empire could only defend, never again attack. And in the quiet of the ocean depths, the American submarines drifted away, their periscopes vanishing beneath the waves, leaving behind silence where a fleet once sailed. When the sun rose on June 20th, 1944, the Pacific was quiet, too quiet. The wrecks of Taihō and Shōkaku still burned beneath the waves. Above, only scattered formations of Japanese aircraft remained, the survivors of a once proud air arm. Admiral Ozawa's command was shattered. 7 carriers still floated, but most had no planes to launch, no pilots to fly them. Vice Admiral Mitcher, aboard the USS Lexington, ordered one last strike. 216 American aircraft lifted into the setting sun, their engines echoing across the endless sea. They caught the fleeing Japanese fleet at twilight. The carrier Hiyō was hit, her fuel tanks ignited, and by nightfall she sank, another giant gone. 80 American aircraft never returned. Most ran out of fuel and ditched in the dark, pilots waiting through the night for rescue lights on the horizon. They called it the mission beyond darkness. For Japan, the darkness never lifted. The numbers told the story. 600 Japanese aircraft destroyed in 2 days. 3 carriers sunk. Over 3,000 sailors lost. The Imperial Navy's air arm was gone, its veterans dead, its replacements untrained, its doctrine obsolete. By the end of 1944, Japan could no longer train real pilots. Fuel was scarce, flight schools bombed, instructors killed. So they changed the definition of a pilot. They called them kamikaze. Training someone to fly into a ship took weeks. Training them to come back took years. Japan no longer had years. It was not a choice born of honor. It was born of desperation. Across the empire, young men wrote farewell letters, strapped on rising sun headbands, and climbed into cockpits they would never leave. They were told their sacrifice would save Japan. It did not. By 1945, the war in the Pacific had become one-sided slaughter. American pilots described shooting down Japanese planes as little more than target practice. The courage of the Japanese pilots never changed. Only their chance to live did. Every flight was a death sentence signed by their leaders. For the United States, the Battle of the Philippine Sea was more than victory. It was proof that modern war belongs to nations that can train, build, and supply faster than they can be destroyed. Training mattered more than courage. Logistics mattered more than legend. The Empire of Japan had believed in the warrior spirit. America believed in the machine. And the machine won. When the war ended, only the photograph of one young man remained, Alexander Virachu, smiling, 6 fingers raised against the light of the Pacific. It was more than a victory pose. It was the face of an age. The moment the sky itself declared, the world had entered the age of industrial war and never looked back. History often remembers battles by their blood, by their heroes, by their fire. But the Battle of the Philippine Sea is remembered by its numbers. 3 Japanese carriers sunk, 600 aircraft destroyed, 23 American planes lost. The ratio, 11-1. Behind that number lies the truth of modern war, that courage without capacity is tragedy, and genius without scale is defeat. The Japanese Navy entered the Pacific War believing in the decisive battle, a single clash where skill and spirit would triumph. The Americans entered believing in systems, training programs, logistics chains, and mass production. When the two beliefs met over the Marianas, faith met mathematics, and mathematics won. Every Hellcat in the air that day was built in a factory that never slept. Every pilot came from a program that never stopped improving. The battle was not fought only by men. It was fought by engineers, instructors, mechanics, welders, and the nameless thousands who built the machine behind the man. That was America's real weapon, not the aircraft itself, but the ability to replace it before the wreckage cooled. While Japan built warriors, America built systems. And in the age of industry, systems always outlast warriors. By war's end, Japan's carriers could still float, but they were empty shells. No pilots to launch, no fuel to burn, no hope to fly. The young men who had once dreamed of glory were sent on one-way missions with no return. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was not just a victory. It was a lesson written in fire and steel. It taught the world that modern warfare rewards preparation, not passion. That logistics wins battles before courage even takes off. And that nations who fail to understand this truth are destined to repeat Japan's fall. From that day forward, every air force on Earth studied the lessons of the Philippine Sea. They built radar networks, standardized training, and planned wars like engineers, not poets. The romantic age of the lone ace was gone. In its place stood the era of coordinated, industrialized air power. It was colder, yes, but it was the future. Alexander Vrachu lived long enough to see that future. He called his 6 kills a small part of something bigger. He was right. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was not about glory, it was about evolution. A moment when the sky itself declared that courage must now serve technology, and that no nation could win a modern war without mastering both. In that sense, the battle never truly ended. It became a warning carved across the Pacific. Train your people, build your systems, respect the math. Because history does not forgive those who mistake bravery for strategy.